Welcome to Wichita Liberty TV with Bob Weeks.
Hello, I'm Bob Weeks for Wichita Liberty TV, your weekly source for news, analysis, and commentary about Wichita and Kansas government and politics. We're broadcast on KGPT Channel 26.1, also its companion website, kgpt26.com. Some of you may know me from my blog, The Voice for Liberty, at wichitaliberty.org. There you'll find the motto is Individual Liberty, Limited Government, and Free Markets in Wichita and Kansas. I cover things that may not be covered by the Wichita Eagle or other TV stations or radio, or if we do cover the same news, I'll do it from the perspective of economic freedom, limited government, and individual liberty, because these are the things that are important, and these are the things that we find so often under attack by our government, be it at the federal, state, or local level. So please visit wichitaliberty.org on the internet. You can subscribe to the email newsletter I send 2 or 3 times a week. And if you'd like to contact me, you can find my email address there, or just remember bob.weeks@gmail.com. Well, this week, the City of Wichita held a workshop where the Community Investments Plan Steering Committee delivered a progress report to the City Council. The document holds some facts that ought to make Wichitans think, and we really need to think hard about this. Now, the time frame of this planning process is the period from 2013 to 2035. And in the document, under the heading Trends and Challenges, we can find some troubling information. Now, Wichita Mayor Coral Brewer hinted at the problem last year in his State of the City address when he said the city would need to spend $2.1 billion on maintenance and replacement of water and sewer pipes. And we also have seen that the city's performance measure report also told us that our pavement condition index has been deteriorating and is projected to continue to decline. So if we've been paying attention, it should not have been a surprise to read this in the presentation, and here's what it says. Decades of underinvestment in infrastructure maintenance, 38% of Wichita's infrastructure is in decent or fair condition. And the cost to remedy this lack of maintenance is substantial. The document says that on an annual basis, Wichita needs to spend $180 million on infrastructure depreciation and replacement costs. And currently, the city spends $78 million a year on this, the presentation indicates. And the cost to bring existing deficient infrastructure up to standards is given as an additional $45 to $55 million per year. Now, that's a lot of money. To place these numbers in context, here are some figures that help illustrate and give meaning to the size of Wichita City finances. Last year, 2013, the city collected $105 million in property tax. And budgeted 2014 expenditures for the fire department are $44 million, and for the police department, $79 million. And we think that if the city adds 1 cent per dollar sales tax to the city, it would generate about $80 million per year. So the amounts by which the city is deficient in maintaining its assets is staggering compared to other expenses the city has. The size of the deficiency overwhelms possible sources of new revenue. A 1 cent per dollar increase in sales tax would not cover the shortfall in maintaining our current assets. And then remember, Wichita, at least the city leaders, want to increase spending on a lot of different things, such as a new library, economic development, expanded public transit, a new convention center, and perhaps other things. The report lists 3 scenarios for future growth: maintaining current trends, or constraining suburban growth, and suburban and infill growth mix. And whenever we see words like constrained, we need to be cautious. We need to be on guard. And the Wichita Eagle reported this. It said, in the city's recently completed series of 102 public meetings, citizens were clear. City Manager Robert Layton said, redevelop the core. We've had enough suburban growth for a while. Now, it's unclear how closely the findings from these public meetings reflect actual citizen preference. Cynics believe that these meetings are run in a way that produces a predetermined outcome aligned with what city officials already want to hear. At any rate, when you ask people about their preferences, but there's no corresponding commitment to act on their proclaimed preferences, well, we have to wonder how reliable these results are. Now, there is a very reliable way to find out what people really want. Just let them do it. If they want to live downtown or in an inner-city neighborhood, that's fine. If they want suburban-style living, well, that's fine too. Well, it should be fine. But reading between the lines of city documents, you get the impression that city planners don't think people should live in suburban-style settings. In fact, we don't have to read between the lines. Sometimes the attitude of the planners is explicit. In 2010, the city employed Goody Clancy, a Boston-based planning firm, to help plan the revitalization of downtown Wichita. And in an article on my site at wichitaliberty.org, I reported on some of what the planners said. For example, David Dixon, the Goody Clancy principal for this project, told how that in the future, Wichitans will be able to, and I quote, enjoy the kind of social and cultural richness that is found only at the core. He said, have dinner someplace, pass a cool shop, go to a great national music act at the arena, go to a bar, and if we're lucky, stumble home. That's his quote. Well, the idea that only downtown people are socially and culturally rich is an elitist attitude that we ought to reject in Wichita. And by the way, when I presented this to the Wichita City Council, I noted that no council members, except for possibly one, lived in the neighborhoods that might be described as the core, where people are culturally sophisticated and rich. Now, other speakers from Goody Clancy revealed a condescending attitude towards those who hold values different from this group of planners. One presenter said, outside of Manhattan and Chicago, the traditional family household generally looks for a single-family detached house with yard where they think their kids might play, and they never do. Now, she meant the Manhattan that's part of New York City, not the home of the Kansas State University Wildcats. But this, again, is an elitist attitude. Now, it's worse than that. It's condescending. It shows us that the professional planning class thinks that people can't decide for themselves what they really want. Somehow, people are duped into buying homes that don't really meet their needs, and they're not smart enough to realize that. This is the attitude of the professional planning class. It's an elitism that Wichitans ought to reject. But the planners tell us that the process is based on data. Data-driven is a term they use. But when we look under the covers of the data, we realize that we need to be very skeptical of claims. Returning to the Goody Clancy plan for downtown Wichita, the principal planner used something called walk score in a presentation delivered in Wichita. Now, this walk score is a purported measurement of the walkability of a location in a city. And walkability is a key design element of the master plan Goody Clancy has developed for downtown Wichita. The planners, you see, they don't want you to drive your personal automobile. According to them, you should be riding a bus or train, riding a bicycle, or walking. Now, walk score is not a project of Goody Clancy as far as I know, and David Dixon is not responsible for the accuracy or reliability of the walk score website. But he presented it and relied on it as an example of the data-driven approach that Goody Clancy takes. Now, the score for 525 East Douglas, that's the block the Eaton Hotel and Wichita Downtown Development Corporation are located in. It's mentioned by Dixon as a walkable area, and it scored 91, which means, according to the Walk Score website, it's a walker's paradise. But here's where we can see just how bad the data used to develop these scores really is. For a grocery store, and that's an important component of walkability, the website indicates a grocery store just 0.19 of a mile away, just a couple blocks in other words, and it's called the Pepsi Bottling Group on Broadway between Douglas and First Streets. Now, if you're familiar with that area, you know there is no grocery store there, only office buildings. So the claim of a grocery store there is false. And there were other claimed amenities where the data is just as bad. But the chairman of the Wichita Downtown Development Corporation at the time said that walk score has been updated. I should no longer be concerned with the credibility of this data, he told me through a comment left on my website. Well, he was right about one thing. Walk score had been updated. Now for the same location, the walk score dropped to 85%, which is considered very walkable. The grocery store is no longer the Pepsi bottling group. Instead, the grocery store is now Marketplace, whose address is given as 155 North Market Street, Suite 220. Now, if someone would ever happen to walk by that location, he'd find that this address, 155 North Market Street, is the management office for an office building whose name is Marketplace. And it's named Marketplace because it's located on Market Street, not for selling groceries. So there's still no grocery store, nothing even resembling a grocery store. Now, I looked this week at the WalkScore website again. It's been updated and redesigned. Now for the same block in the heart of downtown Wichita, the walk score is 74, which is described as very walkable. And in a narrative explanation on the walk score website, it says the closest grocery stores are Ray Sales Company, Marketplace, and the Hotspot Detox Shop. Now, I don't know if you've ever been to Ray Sales, but it's a tiny store with a very limited product selection. It's not the type of place that will attract many people to downtown Wichita. And we know that because officials say a grocery store is one of downtown's most pressing needs, even though that store is there. And Marketplace, again, is listed as evidence of a grocery store in downtown Wichita, but we know that Marketplace is simply the name of an office building located on Market Street. It's not a grocery store. And the third location listed as a grocery store is a detox shop that sells kits to help people pass drug tests. It's not a grocery store either. Now, I emphasize again that David Dixon and Goody Clancy did not create the walk score data, but they presented it to Wichitans as an example of the data-driven, market-oriented approach they use to planning our city. In fact, Dixon cited walk score data as the basis for higher real estate values based on the walkability of the area and its surrounding amenities. But anyone who relies on the evidence Dixon and Goody Clancy presented would surely get burnt unless they investigated the area on their own. And since this reliance on walk score was made after Goody Clancy had spent considerable time in Wichita, the fact that someone there could not immediately recognize how utterly bogus the data was, well, that should give us cause for concern that the entire planning process is based on similarly shoddy data and analysis. Now, returning to the city's presentation, how does the city constrain suburban growth? Well, it does that by taking away the freedom for people to live where they want. And why would the city want to do that? Well, the city says that suburban development is expensive. It's not sustainable. It depends on the personal automobile. And remember the attitude of the professional planners Wichita Downtown Development Corporation hired. People can be trusted to know what they really want for themselves. Now, if it really is more expensive to develop new suburban areas, the city should charge what it costs. And to some extent, this already happens. Anyone who builds a new home in a new area will pay for the residential street and other infrastructure through special taxes. And if the city feels it needs to charge for building arterial streets to serve new suburban areas, it should do so. But the city should realize that people, when spending their own money to buy or rent a residence, and that's really the best indication of their true preferences. What people say in focus groups or on paper survey forms is nowhere near as revealing. And the survey that Wichita has used has its own problems. Here is an example of a question respondents were asked to agree or disagree with. Local government, the school district, community organizations, and the business community should work together to create an investment climate that is attractive to business. Okay, an attractive business climate. Well, who could be opposed to that? But first of all, it means different things to different people. Some people want an investment climate where property rights are respected, where government refrains from meddling in the economy and transferring one person's property to another, an environment free from cronyism, in other words. But the way Wichita is, unfortunately, well, it's cronyism, where government takes an active role in managing economic development. We in Wichita never know when our local government will take from us to give to politically favored cronies, or when City Hall will set up and subsidize a competitor to your business. And on the survey, sometimes the questions are misleading. A question relating to the subsidy program at the Wichita Airport read, "I'm willing to pay increased taxes or fees to support investment that uses public dollars to reduce the costs and increase the number of commercial flights at Wichita Mid-Continent Airport." Well, that's an example of a question which has a false premise. Since these airport subsidy programs have been in place, the number of flights from which the Wichita Airport has declined, not increased as the question would lead readers to believe. Now, on these and other issues, the Wichita Eagle quoted Mayor Brewer as saying, "We've put them off too long. We didn't want the challenges. We didn't want the tax bills. But now, to maintain our quality of life, we've got to catch up." Well, it's almost as if the mayor is speaking as a bystander, but he's been mayor for nearly 7 years and was on the city council before that time. And during that time, he and other city leaders have boasted of not increasing property taxes. Now, while the property tax rate has been stable, property tax revenue has increased due to development of new property and rising assessment values. But in spite of this, the city still has a huge backlog of deferred maintenance. The way to interpret this is that the city has really been engaging in deficit spending under Carl Brewer's leadership. We didn't spend what was needed to maintain our assets, and now the mayor tells us we need to increase spending to make up for that. Now, the economist Milton Friedman told us that it's more important to look at government spending rather than the level of taxation. That's because spending must be paid for either through current taxes or future taxation. Now, the federal government can generate deficits and can pay for spending through creating inflation. Fortunately, states and cities generally can't do that. But as we've seen, cities like Wichita can incur costs without paying for them, and that's a form of deficit spending. By deferring the maintenance of our city infrastructure, the city of Wichita has pushed spending to future years. And the report released this week gives an idea of the magnitude of this deferred spending. It's big. It's huge. This form of deficit spending is off the books and doesn't appear in city financial statements, but it's real, as the mayor now admits. The threat to our freedom to live where we want is real too. We must be watchful and diligent. Welcome back to Wichita Liberty TV. I'm Bob Weeks. Last week I attended a conference produced by the Franklin Center for Government and Public Integrity. We met in Alexandria, Virginia at a very nice hotel where I had stayed there also last December. At that time, the maid noticed I left an empty Diet Coke bottle in the trash. And at the end of the day, when I returned to my room, well, there was a can of Diet Coke on the desk along with a note that said, "Dear Mr. Weeks, please enjoy this Diet Coke." So this trip I brought along with me an empty bottle of fine old single malt Scotch whiskey. Well, no, I didn't really do that, but I thought about it. At the conference, we had a number of very useful briefings. One was presented by Jim Pinkerton, the journalist, Fox News contributor, and co-founder of the RATE Coalition. That stands for Reforming America's Taxes Equitably. In his briefing, he referred to the economist Frederick Hayek and told us that the purpose of high taxes on the rich is not to get the rich to pay money, it's to get the middle class to feel better about paying high taxes. While others have also noted that changes to marginal tax rates often have little impact on the amount of taxes actually paid. The top marginal tax rate, that's the rate that applies to high-income earners on most of their income, was above 90% during most of the decade of the 1950s. From 2003 to 2012, it was 35%. It's now been raised to 39.6%. The top marginal rate is the rate that applies to income, and it's not the same as what is actually paid. And this fact is unknown or ignored by those who clamor for higher taxes on the rich. They often cite the rising prosperity of the 1950s as caused by the high marginal tax rate, over 90%, remember, in effect at the time. Well, the mistake the progressives make is equating tax rates with the tax actually paid. Now, for many people, there's a direct relationship. For workers who earn a paycheck, There's really not much they can do to change the timing of their income, find tax shelters, or shift income to capital gains. When income tax rates rise, they generally have to pay more. But rich people can use these and other strategies to reduce the taxes they pay. But as Pinkerton told the conference attendees, the high tax rates make the middle class feel better about paying their own taxes. They may take comfort in the fact that someone else is worse off, at least based on the misconception that high tax rates mean rich people actually pay correspondingly higher tax, at least when considering tax rates. Well, I gathered data from the Bureau of Economic Analysis, that's part of the United States Department of Commerce, and along with my calculations, I made a series of charts. In this chart, you can see that the top line, which is the top marginal tax rate in effect for each year, well, that's varied widely. The other two lines show total taxes and total federal income taxes as a percent of gross domestic product. And as you can see, since World War II, these lines are fairly constant and level, even as the top marginal tax rate has varied widely. And then using data from the Internal Revenue Service and the Congressional Budget Office, I developed two other charts. One shows the share of total federal taxes paid by top income earners, in this case the top 5% and the top 1%. And for the range of years for which the CBO provides data, well, you can see the top marginal income tax rate again varies widely, mostly in a falling direction, and the share of federal income taxes paid by top earners has risen slightly. And a second chart shows the average federal tax rate for these two groups of top earners, and we can see that the average federal tax rate paid by them has varied much less than has the tax rates. Now, this may be surprising to you, that tax rates can vary widely, but the taxes actually paid, at least by top income earners, doesn't change very much. This is an example of people reacting to incentives in ways that policymakers don't anticipate. Well, a second speaker at the conference was the economist Stephen Moore, who recently left the Wall Street Journal editorial board to become chief economist at Heritage Foundation. And a large portion of his presentation was on energy and its important role in the economy, and how radical environmentalists, the Green Movement, are hurting our economy and people. An irony, he said, is that while President Barack Obama is in the hip pocket of radical environmentalists, he is presiding over the greatest oil and gas boom in American history. And this boom is proceeding in spite of government, not because of it. Well, Moore emphasized the importance of energy costs to low-income people. Rising energy costs are like taxes on them, he said, while the wealthy can more easily absorb higher energy costs. He told the audience to be green is to be against capitalism, against progress, against poor people, and against jobs. He also told the attendees that the boom in oil and gas production in America, made possible by horizontal drilling and fracking, is ahead of the rest of the world. And while European countries have in the past embraced green energy technologies, these policies have largely failed, and the countries are retreating from them. Now, European countries want to use American drilling technologies, he said. And the lower electricity prices in America are a competitive advantage over Europe and China. German auto manufacturers, for example, are shutting down plants in Europe and moving them to the United States. And of the radical environmental groups, Steve Moore told the audience, they don't even care about global warming. If they really cared about global warming, they would be cheerleading fracking, because fracking is making natural gas the new fuel for America. And guess what? Natural gas emits less carbon. It's a great antidote to global warming. That's the end of his quote. Well, I looked it up. According to the U.S. Energy Information Administration, when generating electricity, coal emits from 2.08 to 2.18 pounds of carbon dioxide per kilowatt-hour electricity generated. Natural gas emits just 1.22 pounds, or about 43% less carbon dioxide. Well, Moore went on to tell us that it is the United States that has reduced its carbon emissions the greatest amount in the last 5 years. He said this is remarkable in light of the fact that the U.S. didn't sign the Kyoto Treaty, the U.S. did not implement cap and trade, and also the U.S. did not implement a carbon tax. And he said you'd think that these environmental groups would be applauding natural gas. Now these environmentalist groups have a new campaign called Beyond Natural Gas. He said that at first, environmentalists said they could accept in natural gas as a bridge fuel to solar power and wind. They were in favor of natural gas, he said, well, up until the time it became cheap and plentiful. Now they are against gas. My point is, he said, the left and environmentalists are against any energy source that really works. Over the past 6 years, he told us that the United States has spent $100 billion promoting wind and solar power, but together these two sources account just for 2.2% of the electricity generated in America. Even if the country were to quadruple the portion of electricity generated by these two renewable sources over the next 10 to 20 years, the nation would still need to get 90% of its electricity from other sources. And Moore thought this was doubtful that the country could achieve those goals. Well, to further investigate the topics Moore raised, I gathered data from the Global Carbon Atlas and prepared interactive visualizations using Tableau Public. You can use these visualizations at wichitaliberty.org, but here are some findings I'll share with you. If we look at the chart of total carbon emissions, we see two important facts. First, after rising slowly, carbon emissions by the United States have declined in recent years. Second, carbon emissions by China are soaring. China surpassed the United States around 2005, and the gap between the two countries is increasing. Note also that carbon emissions in India are rising. Emissions in the most advanced economies, that's us and Europe, and mostly in Canada, are steady or falling. And these trends are emphasized in the chart that shows carbon emissions for each country indexed from a common starting point. Emissions from China and India are rapidly rising, while emissions from countries with advanced economies have risen slowly or have declined. Well, a chart that shows carbon emissions efficiency of countries, that is, the carbon emitted per unit of gross domestic product, shows that in general, countries are becoming more efficient. Advanced economies such as the United States, Japan, and Germany have an advantage in this metric. These countries emit about 1/4 as much carbon per unit GDP as does China. And the chart of carbon emissions per person in each country shows that the United States leads in this measure. In 2011, the U.S. emitted about 17 tons of carbon dioxide per person. China was at 6.6 and India at 1.7. But the trend in the United States is downwards, that is, less carbon emitted per person. In China and India, the trend is up and rising very rapidly in China. Well, so what does all this mean? Well, the rapid rise of carbon emissions from China and India dwarfs anything that the United States and other developed economies can do to reduce carbon emissions. When radical environmentalists ask you to spend more on electricity or gasoline, or to pay higher taxes in the name of global warming, remember that anything we can do in America to reduce carbon emissions is insignificant on the global stage. Well, thank you for watching this episode of Wichita Liberty TV. I'm Bob.